Okay, well, first of all, thanks for coming on a good day, actually, in terms of we're still in the playoffs, so I think the mood of the city has kind of risen a little bit. We still have a ways to go, but it's a beginning, so that's good. I'm really glad we're not here in another circumstance, so that's good. Important topic, and it's really nice to see so many people coming out just for mental health topics in general. This is a series of conversations we give at the Royal, roughly once a month, once every 2 months, on various topics. And this is turning out to be an increasingly popular topic and one that we don't really deal with a whole bunch. So just a little bit of an outline. We always start off with conflicts and disclosures. Usually we do drug company talks and we have financial stuff. So no, there's no financial disclosure or anything from me. I will disclose, however, I have 2 boys, so I'm kind of biased. And also the majority of this presentation was researched and put together by my wife, who really doesn't like standing in front of audiences. So thank you. We are then going to talk a little bit about stereotypes and the male stereotypes, a little bit about men's mental health, a little bit about boys. You've probably heard about Mars and Venus and the differences between men and women. We'll explore that a little bit. Then a little bit about the future, some conclusions, and hopefully have a good conversation, because that's what this is all about. So we're going to start off with a little test. If some of you have already taken this test and hopefully passed, please don't tell your neighbor what the answer is.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
So how many got 13? Who got 12 or 14? Who saw the moonwalking bear? Okay. So, I just like that video, but I did put it there for a reason. And I think in these types of presentations, you'll hear a variety of things, and I'd like you to pay attention to the things that perhaps seem a little bit new to you. Perhaps things that make you a little uncomfortable, perhaps things you agree with too easily. Because I think the important piece in these types of conversations and these types of sessions is to think about things that you don't normally think about and keep an open mind to things. So let's see how we do. So we'll start off with stereotypes. And stereotypes are really important. We have a couple of different types, and people describe them in different ways, but they can be explicit, and we're very much aware of the stereotypes we have and hold, and some can be implicit. And those are the type that you're not aware of. So we all have them. And there's a reason for stereotypes, so you cannot pretend you don't have them, and if you think you don't have them, you're not aware of the implicit ones, so you have them, right? So the self-awareness piece is really important. And like I said, we have advantages of stereotypes. Our minds, our brains are built to stereotype. We have tons of information coming in all the time, and we've got to categorize. If we don't do that, we just get overwhelmed. So we can process large amounts of data, and we also use it for social functions. We know who we hang out with, who we don't hang out with, and we go to the people who we have certain stereotypes about. Problem is, they're not always correct, and they're usually based on our own experiences, and they may not apply to the stereotype we're considering. They're also interesting in that with our in-group, the group that we are associated with, we see the nuances and the different colors and shades within the group. We understand that that stereotype has a wide range. When we look at other groups and other stereotypes, we tend to think that they're all the same, and we don't see the colors and the nuances. The other part that's changing very quickly is that we're in a global marketplace, a global situation now. So historically, you used to know if someone's from a certain culture, probably that's, you know some things about them. Not anymore. People travel worldwide, they marry worldwide, kids are from different cultures. So culture has lost its stereotype to a certain extent. So we're going to get into a little bit, it's not a history lesson, but the history of kind of men in 2 minutes or less. So men were not always in the current stereotype, I would argue. If you go back to the 1700s roughly, they were thoughtful, virtuous, wise, possibly reflective, good things. When you go to the industrial period, that's when you get things really starting to change. Men left for work, factories, women in general stayed home and provided for the household. Things changed much more to, I would argue, the current situation in around the 20th century, and I'll let you just have a quick read on that. And I think that's pretty much, I would argue, we'll have a conversation about it, where we kind of are today. In other words, describing much of the same thing. And I think with that stereotype, it's hard to break the stigma of men reaching out for help, be it mental health or even physical health care, all the things that you need to do to maintain your health. So, what is our current stereotype? I don't have an answer for you, by the way, and they all have their risks and benefits, but none of them are perfect, and we're probably a combination of things. And I think the stereotype is evolving. I think this would have been the ideal stereotype not long ago. I'll leave it at that. I won't touch the others. So, more recently, though, there's been an interesting sort of evolution to the stereotype, and people would argue about this, but I think in certain places, there's a bit of a negative portrayal of men. A little more violent, a little aggressive. These aren't my terms, but the moronification of men, daddyettes, and more insidious is the assumption that men are going to do bad things as a group, that presumption of perversion. We'll get into that a little bit more. And we'll get into the first of our videos. And what I like on videos, and they're commercials, these are mainly commercials, and commercials tell you a little bit about our society. I always look at facial expressions in commercials because they're really produced well. So let's just see what you think on a couple.
Wow, he's like a deer in headlights. He doesn't really think if he stares long enough, new food will magically appear, does he? Just like magic. Voila. Where does he get that from? Oh, and there you have it. The tree from which the apple fell.
Innovations that fit your life, only from LG. With LG, it's all possible.
Not a great portrayal. Now, they're not all like that. We'll have a couple of others. This one's a little more subtle, but message is pretty clear.
To prove Huggies diapers and wipes can handle anything, we put them to the toughest test imaginable. Dads, alone with their babies, in one house for 5 days. While we gave moms some well-deserved time off. How did Huggies products hold up to daddyhood? The world is about to find out.
Good luck, babe.
So that was an interesting commercial, actually, and got such a backlash that it got banned, and Huggies actually changed their campaign. So something quite different, and a fairly recent commercial. Now, I want to point out that the stereotypes are not just about men, and there's always some truth to stereotypes too. So don't want to say all of that's totally false, but women certainly have not been immune to stereotypes, and we'll touch on a couple. This one, I gotta say, is my wife's favorite. So you have to watch the facial expression, and she just hates it. I'm not sure why she hates it this much. I don't like it, but.
Just one look, and I felt so hard in love with you.
All of the love, all up to 60% less. Winners find fabulous for less.
So, really, it really doesn't work at many levels. So the objectification of women, I think, is still nowhere near gone. So you see it there, you see it in the shopping, you see it in that vacant look as they're shopping. But it's everywhere. Cosmo, classic, it's always there. What do you got? Fix your lips, figure out how to eat, shoes, bags, jewels, love, sex, obsession, and you throw in a little bit about passion and being psycho. But you know what? This is not an uncommon cover on a magazine. So we'll leave stereotypes for a moment and move on a little bit to what's happening to men in general. And I must say, when we were looking at this and trying to figure out, some of the data, some of the stereotypes, etc., there's very little in Canada on sort of men, boys, mental health. The work being done is mainly, and I was not aware, in England. They do some stuff in Australia, New Zealand, a lot of places much further ahead than in Canada. And although Canadians hate hearing it, more work being done in the US now as well. Some recognition that we have to start paying attention. So some of the data is out of some good British publications, this being one of them in 2011. So here's just some of the data regarding how well men are doing in general. So they go missing a lot. They're 90%, and the data is pretty similar here, a little less, I think, but vast majority are men. They make up the vast majority of prisoners, and we'll get into some of the suicide stats as well. So in general, not directly mental health per se, but they don't live as long as women. They're 3 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide. And interestingly, they don't go to their docs as much. When they do, they don't ask as many questions, and physicians don't ask as many questions of men. Fascinating. Not surprising either if you actually think about it. So here's the suicide data. And that's the ugly part of sort of the presentation. So here's the combined, this is StatsCan. So here's both sexes, here's females, here's males. So it's actually 3 to 4 times the rate of suicide across the lifespan too. Because if you look at the most vulnerable population, it's actually so this is males, this is females, but the most at risk by far is middle-aged men. So in this graph, it's 40 to 59, but the highest risk group is 50 to 54. And I think that's been a stat that's kind of been out there, but it doesn't seem to create any, in my view, major concern. And here's just another quick way to look at it. So youth, that we always talk about youth suicide, and boy, it's an important topic because the youth are vulnerable and we must care for our youth. So don't get me wrong, I always get into trouble if I sort of don't put a disclaimer there. But youth suicide's down here. Then it goes up, 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 middle age. Goes actually down a little bit, and then there's a peak, but the numbers get a lot smaller, so it's not that dramatic really as you get older. And that's also under-recognized, suicide in seniors. How many people have heard about suicide in seniors as an issue? Some of you, that's kind of cool, but this is also a bit of a mental health crowd, so, but still, that's good, but under-recognized by the public. So other stats, men's mental health, they don't ask for help as much higher rates of addiction, and that's across the board. Someone commented to me earlier today, we know it's alcohol, we know it's substances, and yes, it is gambling and the online gaming, all of that, all the addictive phenomena, men, they're really good at it. Homeless are mainly men, and men direct violence mainly at men, but women too. Now, a little bit of a dangerous topic, but thought I'd bring it up because I was a little surprised too. So the intimate partner violence, that we do actually have female on male domestic violence, and it's actually on the rise. Men do call in regarding domestic abuse, and the CDC reports 4 to 5% of reported rapes are women towards men. So not many people are too aware of that. And people do argue about the numbers, about CDC numbers being high, but not the proportion, just the amount of violence across both sexes. Overall, in summary on that, there is a certain gender symmetry. Most studies would say it is more men towards women, but not by a whole ton. 40, 60, 45, 55, that range. And you can always argue data. My point here is not the data and the amount, but it does happen to men as well. Stigma when it comes to partner violence is huge across both sexes. I would say it's underreported for men and underreported for women. It is particularly underreported, and we don't know by how much because, well, that's what underreported is. So men, imagine a man saying, well, I was raped by a woman. It just doesn't fit our way of thinking. And other reasons are actually similar to women, that they won't be believed and those types of issues. There is an additional threat, however, about separation from children that affects men more when there's partner disagreements and separations and divorces. So we're going to talk a little bit about boys. So boys are nice. They're really nice. And we're not doing well by boys. Before we go to boys, though, we'll go back a little bit to men, and data that's pretty indisputable. I'm not going to give you numbers, but these are the types of things that happen not only to boys, but to girls when fathers are involved in the lives of their children. I'll let you just have a peek at that. I won't go one by one. The education piece, by the way, we'll get to later too. Very important. So they do better in just about everything. When it comes to girls, the data shows you that less teenage pregnancy in girls when fathers are involved. So that's really for both boys and girls. So you want your fathers involved in parenting. And we have pockets particularly well known in the United States, where there's some demographics of fathers having really left the household, and you have children raised by single parents, mainly female. The list kind of really goes on and on, doesn't it? But all of that is quite true, so I won't belabor the issue. But we want, as a society, both parents involved. Mothers tend to be involved more still, but you want your father involved. So I gave you some sort of nastier commercials. This is Super Bowl commercial, by the way. You couldn't have seen this 5 years ago. I can't imagine.
Daddy. Dada.
Dove Men Plus Care. Care makes a man care.
I told you you'd be seeing commercials. But strategically placed, by the way, Super Bowl. So, and I think still, I'm not sure, we're getting gender parity there too, but more men watch the Super Bowl than women. That's just a guess. Okay, we'll move a little bit to education. And this, when we looked at, my wife and I looked at education, we were a little bit surprised by the data. Okay, no doubt, historically, boys were favored in the educational system. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I would say till at least the 1960s, boys were substantially favored. For a variety of reasons, there was a very good and appropriate push for girls to, encourage them to get involved in science, sports, mathematics. And I think boys were ignored because, frankly, that was fine. And it was fine in the 60s, 70s. So let's fast forward here. This is kind of a summary slide, but then we'll go back into a little bit of information. This was an article that came out I was looking at this, so it's really neat. In The Economist, March 2015, and good data from the OECD, European think tank that puts out, reliable, good data. So it's a little hard to read, but 100% is equal men and women. So anything above the line is more females, below the line is more males. And this is post-secondary education. So worldwide, so more, right here's the crossover point, little in past the 2000s, more women in post-secondary school education. Countries that were further behind, regions, South Asia, rapidly increasing. And here's your North American data. We're right about here. So it's about 60-40 in our colleges and university now. So how did we get there? Anyone surprised? Probably not if you've gone around a university campus lately, but what else has happened? Girls excel academically. They do outperform boys. Boys are more likely to drop out. As noted, fewer males enrolling in university and attaining advanced degrees. A little bit of Ontario data, just on boys suspended or expelled from schools. Students that are suspended, 76% male. If you go to expelled, 84% are males. And I guess, well, that's the way it is. If we were in healthcare, we'd be looking at this data and looking systemically to say, how is this happening? In fact, why is anyone being expelled and suspended? What do we do to make sure people get through school and learn what they can? But when you look at the suspensions and people's expelled, it is the boys. Tough topic here, but what is happening to our schools? I think in many ways our boys are being told that they should not have anything to do with what I would describe as sort of those destructive masculine ideals. And they need to actually be re-socialized towards a bit more of the feminine ideals. And I think even our grading now is based a little bit on your behavior. So in the report from the OECD, when you actually take scores for boys and girls and you get teacher evaluations, girls do a lot better than boys. When you do standardized tests, boys and girls, the gap narrows, which is really interesting. So that tells you there's something else happening. Boys are being graded a little bit on behavior, interaction in schools, and other things just than objective data. So what else is happening? Do we do dodgeball anymore? I don't think so. Dodgeball's pretty dangerous, right? Do we do it somewhere? I'm getting some yeses, some nos, but it's a pretty dangerous activity. Someone could get hurt. I survived it. Yeah, And what else? We certainly don't compete, and if you're not doing well in sports, your self-esteem just plummets. So I'm not sure what that's doing to us in general. We don't have much competition. This is a bit more of a personal story when my boys were growing up, and there was one boy, quite young, and principal came out in the winter and said, "What are you building there?" And it was a snow fort, right? No damage being done, but it was a snow fort. Was told quite clearly and reprimanded, "You can build a snowtel, not a snow fort." Anyone know what a snowtel is? I didn't. It's a hotel from snow is what I came to discover. So, it's just gotten a little bit out of control in general. And I think we're getting graded more on the good behavior, and it is being factored into grades, and there's some objective data. I think if you look especially in the early years, over 80% of the first role models boys have in society are their teachers. How many male teachers are there out there now? So we're the role models in the schools. Essentially gone. And I think, back to the presumption of perversion, I think a male interested in getting into the classroom and teaching has to pause, because you've got to be, I don't know, whether you can touch a boy or girl on the head, on the shoulder, or maybe with some, I don't know, pencil. Things have gotten a little out of hand with that type of stuff. And I think boys are starting to internalize that their gender is not that good. And there's actually some data on that. So there was a pretty big study done out of the University of Kent, and I'll let you read it. So that doesn't bode real well for sort of the future of education for boys, and I think gives a little bit of insight into what's happening in our current sort of high schools, elementary schools, and more importantly, where we're heading in the future. So this is also from the article, and the gap's widening. So the risk is, we always look now, right? So there are many issues that still have to be resolved with women, right? Women in the boardroom, women getting the really top jobs in corporations, still behind. That glass ceiling, which, by the way, if you go to this article, they have a really interesting thing on which countries have more of a glass ceiling than others. So those issues have to be addressed and should be addressed. That's now. You tell me that will not, what's going to happen in 20, 30 years? You will have a real underclass of boys, less educated than women, in, what do we call it, a knowledge-based economy, a brain-based economy? That's going to be an interesting sociological phenomena, but we never, sorry, a little opinionated here, we never look out 10, 20 years. Because right now we've got certain issues here, it's not so bad maybe. 10, 20 years, this is potentially a huge problem. So hope we can get more of my opinions on that in Q&A. I have a lot of them on that one, sorry. Mars and Venus. So some of you may have read the book. I think men are from Mars, women are from Venus. So I think in some ways we're different, and I've talked about some of the differences, but also a bit more similar perhaps than previously thought. In terms of psychological attributes, pretty close together. Overall intelligence, there are some differences in types of intelligence, but fairly similar. There are some clear physical differences, no doubt on that. There are different rates of maturation of certain parts of the brain. In general, girls mature in certain domains earlier than boys. Fascinating stuff on compartmentalized learning. So males in general tend to compartmentalize things, and women can use both hemispheres a little easier. Women tend to be better, girls tend to be better in the verbal skills, and these are the skills for the future. And spatial processing is actually a little bit better on average for the boys. We don't tend to really, accept all of this as differences that are there, but not as crucial as you may think, because at the end of the day, people are individuals, they're not groups. So we tend to forget that. And there's some differences in a bit of the brain as well, frontal cortex versus amygdala. We're not going to get into brain stuff. Other people do that better than I. So here's a question. So the skill sets. Should they, and the differences, should they be seen as complementary or really differences that are problematic? So I always felt that it's nice to have different skill sets, different abilities, and I would argue that the skill sets of male and female allow them to actually work well together and actually take attributes from one group and another group and come up with good teams. So I don't think we should be highlighting so much how different, but actually maybe celebrating some of those differences, not going to war over them. So what's the path to a more healthy manhood? And this comes a lot from sort of the stuff I was reading from Britain. So challenge a bit of the perception and the social narrative that men who come forth with problems, admit weakness, are problematic. Encourage them to seek help and normalize some of the health problems. Physical exams, by the way, it's not only mental health. Men don't go for their, colonoscopies and stress tests and things like that. It was quite funny not funny actually, Brian Murray talked about his cancer, and a whole bunch of people in his kind of demographic hockey world thanked him and ran off and got colonoscopies. So it's important to get some of your role models doing these things. Men aren't really good at recognizing triggers to illness also, so they mask them quite well. Some behaviors in men masking psychological distress. So, fascinating thing that maybe we'll talk about later. So, we do know that women have more anxiety and depression than men. That's what they're diagnosed with, at least, 2 to 3 times more. So women have more anxiety and depression. Somehow, though, men drink more, they get more irritable, angry, they go to jail, and they commit suicide. But they're not anxious and they're not depressed. We'll talk about that, because I don't think those things really work well together. Other things, appreciate masculine traits. So men actually do go a little bit quicker to problem solving. They, in general, more independent. They control their emotions, right? That's seen as really bad because you're always supposed to express everything. So yes, you should express, but there are times when you can celebrate a little bit of control. So, celebrate some of those ideals a little bit. Oh, I will share this one because it happens so often, right? So man talking to woman, right? I just wish he would understand that I don't want an answer, I don't want a solution, I just want to be listened to, right? And it's true. Is that, and are we getting any kind of, I've heard it a lot, I'm not getting a reaction. It's a dangerous topic, right? You ever heard a guy say, I'll listen, but I'm kind of programmed to try to give you an answer. So how about let's negotiate how long I listen, and then I just want to give you an answer because it's coming out of me. I need to give you an answer. That's my biological makeup. I just want to give an answer. Dangerous topic, so I'll let it go. So, yes, identifying men at risk. Unemployed, and unemployment for men is still more psychologically disturbing than unemployment for women. That may not be fair. That's the current makeup. Things are changing a bit. You do see couples where really there's a great negotiation between staying at home, taking care of kids, who goes to work, part-time, full-time, all of that. So things are changing there a bit, but I think it affects men especially because their self-esteem is tied in more to the work life. So how do you let them access a little better? You've got to find them where they are, like the Super Bowl commercial. It's actually not a Super Bowl commercial. It was played at the Super Bowl. That's where you do it. And you actually need to reach out a bit to places where they might be. We don't do that well, too, because you actually can't get you can't get men together in groups, right? It's really just not a good idea. It's kind of scary. You don't know what they're doing. You don't know what they're talking about. And to be a little provocative, and I actually kind of read this, and I think it's paraphrased a little, but thoughts on that. So in general, women's programs are viewed as empowering. It's empowering, right? We get together, that's good. Men, when they get together, it's discriminatory. So it's a challenge. That's not the case always, but I think that's the general societal view on that. not really nice to say. So other things, same for men and women, physical activity, a little bit more male support staff. So we worried for a long time, by the way, because this is the profession I know. We worried about men in medicine. There were too many men in medicine. And to tell you what, there were too many men in medicine, right? You know what it is now? Across the country, University of Ottawa included, now it is 50% more women than men are getting into med school. And again, we don't project well, and that's a trend for several years. We don't project well into the future, but in 10, 20 years, the majority, and a considerable majority of physicians will be women. So you have to look at that. And meanwhile, I don't hear much about males entering nursing. Anyone see a big push for that? You know, an outcry, men for nursing. We want nursing, let in the men. It doesn't really work that way. So it's a bit of a interesting view of sort of the medical arena. By the way, medicine is mainly women. Physicians, nurses, social workers, psychologists, support care workers. It's pretty much a female industry. By the way, you're most vulnerable when you're in those funny little robes in the hospital and, you know, people are looking all over the place. So you want a little bit of a balance there. A little bit more on boys. So teaching strategies to engage and enhance boys' learning. Can we bring back a little more physical activity, get some of the physical energy out? That is a difference between boys and girls. Boys need a little more physical activities. They need some role models, and they need to understand that their educational achievement is a higher priority in the new economy of the future. Right now, the strategy of, you know, less play, sit down quietly, and, ooh, that's not working, here's some Ritalin, that's not a good way to go. It doesn't seem to be working. Boys' behaviors and learning, they're not defective little girls, they're little boys. Right? We're trying to fix them by making them quiet in the classroom and enhance their verbal skills. Right? So it's not working very well. Boys programs where appropriate, but again, I don't think you can really outreach because I jumped the gun, because you can't get them together, because they're probably plotting to get together to pull the girl's hair, right? So you can't do that. So a bit on conclusions. So I think educational trends in particular regarding boys are crystal clear. You'll look at the data now over the past few decades, girls are out-achieving boys. That's cause for a certain amount of celebration, maybe. I think in the grand scheme of things, you want some equality there. You still hear a lot about, as you should, encouraging girls to get into the areas of math, science, engineering, sports. You still hear a lot about that. You don't hear anything about enhancing boys' ability to grow their verbal skills, problem-solving skills, interacting better in social groups. There isn't much of an emphasis on that. So I would argue that being male is a risk factor for poor mental health and general mental health. Men die 7 years earlier, and they commit suicide at an astonishingly high rate that remains somehow under-recognized. You just don't hear much about it. So we also have to examine our own beliefs about the gender roles. And if we start to understand our stereotypes, I think we can move together a lot more in a positive way. And I think those gender roles are evolving, and I hope we can have a bit of a conversation on that. A little bit about the future. So I think we have a changing, emerging masculinity that's not solidified. I'm not sure where it's going to end up going. I think we're not going to be strong, stoic, all that sort of thing. I also hope we don't move into sort of the daddy idiots and the morons that just don't know what to do with kids or the house. That's not going to be helpful for anyone. I think in general, we have to understand we have stereotypes. We need stereotypes, but in the modern world, we have to have flexible stereotypes. So where's the ability to say, that's who you are, here are my assumptions about you, and I'm ready to change them quite easily. That's what I mean by the flexibility. I see in the future, the only way forward in a positive way is men and women working together towards common societal goals. Also, the current debate or the current talk is interesting, but I don't think in the future we'll be talking nearly as much about gender and culture. We will be talking about socioeconomic status. That will be the great divide. Even now, you can get people of different gender, different cultures hanging out in the boardroom, right? Because they can figure it out. That's a certain socioeconomic class. The other class doesn't mix. That's the great divide in our culture. It's not going to be about sex, gender. It's not going to be about culture. Just my thought on it. And along the same vein, we'll be moving towards personalized medicine. So we're not going to be talking about medicine for healthcare for Hispanics or East Asians or this, that, or men or women. We'll be talking about this person, that person, their gender, their culture, their genes, their biology, their social circumstance. So the hope is it becomes a much more individualized healthcare system. And we look at people as individuals, not just their gender, culture, etc. So that's my thought about, hopefully, a bit of the future. And I like commercials. Sorry, they tell you a lot about society. So I like this one. This is US.
Oh, those boys are much too much. Those boys are much too much. We got the spirit. We're hot. We can't be stopped. We got the spirit. We're hot. We can't be stopped. We're going to beat them and bust them. Beat them.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Let's get a little bit rowdy. R-O-W-D-Y.
Take time to be a dad
One more
today.
time. Oh, those boys are much too much. Those boys.
I like that one. And people who produce ads are very wise. His ethnicity is not there by accident. It's a huge problem, especially in the US, nor is his size. He could be a linebacker quite easily. So I think it's nice. And guess what? You can be a man, you can be a linebacker, and I guess you can do this. Not many did, but you can. So we'll move into the conversations. Many of you probably don't realize, so Lucy, undercharged, but was the first psychiatrist who really opened up a booth. So I just like that picture, so. No subtle meanings there or anything. Okay. So thanks for your sort of attention on what can be a pretty controversial topic, especially when you get into education and those sorts of things.